Hello and welcome back. Our last topic related to cellular metabolism or cell energy is going to be fermentation, okay? Fermentation is going to be an anaerobic way of making ATP, all right? The advantage being oxygen doesn't need to be present in order for these processes to happen within the cell. The bad side on that, you don't produce near as much ATP as you do with aerobic cellular respiration, okay? So with fermentation, you're going to see one step's going to look familiar. We still have glycolysis. And if you notice, I have two pathways up on the board here. I'm going to talk about this one first, then I'll talk about this one, okay? There are a couple different end products that can result from fermentation, and we'll talk about why and how that happens, all right? So with glycolysis, that process of glycolysis is where we're going to generate the ATP. But in addition, remember with glycolysis, we also generate NADH, okay? And that NADH, then, we actually generate two of them, okay? Those two NADH then are going to modify our pyruvate molecules, okay? And what they're going to do, those electrons then are going to be used to rearrange some bonds, create some new molecules. That NADH is converted back to NAD in the second part of the step. So we start out with our glucose. We break our 6-carbon chain into 2 3-carbon chains. Those 3-carbon chains are then further modified via the NADH coming in, those electrons. And what we generate out of this are going to be 2 lactate molecules. You'll also see this as lactic acid. I'm fine with you using either one, okay? And that product of lactic acid, where you may be familiar with this, is when you start working your muscles anaerobically, you will generate lactic acid. That lactic acid is what's in part responsible for that burn you kind of feel inside the muscle. Because acid, it's an acid product, that's where that feeling's coming from, all right? Eventually the body's going to convert that lactic acid into something else. I'm not concerned you know what that something else is, okay? But it converts it into something else to remove that waste product. So with fermentation, this is one way that glucose can be fermented to generate a small amount of ATP. Waste product in this case is the lactic acid, okay? This is common in bacterial cells. This is going to be the common pathway. So if you like yogurt, the bacteria that are in yogurt take the glucose in that, break it down into pyruvate, break it down further into the lactic acid. That lactic acid is what gives yogurt its kind of tangy flavor, okay? So bacterial cells undergo fermentation, and a little more relevant to what you're studying right now, your muscle cells also do this, okay? This actually is going to become relevant when you take microbiology, all right? So that's one set of products we can generate. We can also take our 6-carbon glucose, break it down via glycolysis to generate our ATP. Again, we'd have the NAD converted to NADH. Okay, that NADH then is going to further modify our pyruvate. And in this case, we're going to have something else that's going to happen, all right? We're going to break off one of those carbon molecules, and we're going to generate some carbon dioxide as part of our waste product, okay? You'll actually generate, because we've got 2 pyruvates and we've got 2 carbons, you'll generate 2 molecules of carbon dioxide, okay? That leaves us now with a 2-carbon chain, all right? That 2-carbon chain is going to be ethanol, okay? So this process of fermentation, this is the one that you might be a little more familiar with, because when you're talking about making beer or other fermented beverages, that's what you're looking to get. You're using a microbe to break down sugar to generate the byproduct you want. In this case, the byproduct you want is the alcohol, is the ethanol, okay? And that ethanol then is the waste product that's generated. Primarily, the cells you're talking about this happening in are going to be yeast, although there are some bacteria that can ferment to alcohol instead of lactic acid. Again, not concerned that you know which happen which. I want you to know predominantly if we're talking about having ethanol as a byproduct, this is going to happen in yeast. Remember that yeast are a eukaryotic organism, okay? But they're still microscopic, they're still very small, okay? Basically, that's what you've got happening with fermentation. You're taking glucose, you're breaking it down to pyruvate. That pyruvate molecule is further broken down into the waste products either being the lactic acid or ethanol, okay? And with alcohol fermentation, the reason why you end up getting bubbles in a lot of fermented beverages is because of the carbon dioxide. You trap that carbon dioxide in there, that's what gives the beverage its fizz, all right? This also happens, just as an FYI, this is the process that happens if you happen to like baking bread. The yeast you use to bake bread, when you bake that bread, you have to add a little bit of sugar, sprinkle a little bit of sugar. You're feeding the yeast to get them to go through glycolysis, generate pyruvate, convert the pyruvate into a little bit of ethanol. The alcohol generated when you're baking bread bakes off when you cook the bread. But what's important there, you're generating the carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is what gives you the bubbles to get your bread to rise, okay? So that just gives you a little bit of background into fermentation. If you have any questions, please let me know.